Hello everyone and welcome to class. Today we're going to do the second half of World War II. When we last left off, we were talking about the attack on Pearl Harbor, and I told you I would give you all more details starting with this class. So on December 7th, 1941, at about 8 o'clock in the morning, the island of Hawaii was waking up. It's a Sunday morning. There's not much going on. If you know anything about sailors, Saturday night is their big party night, and they've been out drinking, and they're probably sleeping off a drunk. Some of the islanders are getting up and getting ready for church. There's going to be some military that are already out at the shipyards that are doing, their duty for the weekend. I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see this layout. This is the layout of Pearl Harbor. It's the big Navy base that we've had in Pearl Harbor ever since, the 1890s, when Hawaii lets us establish this naval base. And this area right here is known as Battleship Row. And so these are all the different battleships that are moored at harbor at that time. Now you'll notice that there are not any aircraft carriers in this bunch. Aircraft carriers were already out on training maneuvers out in the Pacific Ocean. So they were not in Pearl at the time. So at about 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning, the Japanese are going to launch a sneak attack on the base at Pearl Harbor. It's going to kill about 2,400 sailors and civilians. 1,200 are injured. You're going to have 200 planes that are caught on the ground. They're just going to destroy them. 18 ships are sunk, including the USS Arizona, and that's what this ship is right here. The Arizona is still there in the harbor. They've built a memorial on top of it. But if you ever look at an aerial view of the Arizona Memorial, you can still see the battleship up underneath it. Because the aircraft carriers were not in port, this is when the aircraft carrier is going to take over as the flagship of the Navy instead of the battleship. Some of these battleships are going to be repaired and sent back out to sea, and some of them are going to be damaged beyond repair. And so the next day, FDR is going to face Congress, and his famous quote for this time period is December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. And he is going to ask Congress for a declaration of war against Japan, and only against Japan. 3 days later, Hitler is going to declare war against the United States. So it's kind of interesting thought process of what might have been different had Germany not declared war on the United States. So now that we're in the war, we're going to fall back on a secret conference that FDR and Winston Churchill had in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean prior to us ever getting the war, discussing that if America ever gets in, this is the strategy we want to use. And this strategy turned out to be what was called the Germany First strategy, where we were going to help Great Britain fight back the Germans. Now, this was without having any idea that we were going to also have Japan on our back doorstep. And so we are going to have a two-front war from the very beginning. The reason why the Japanese attack us is they want a free hand in gaining the Pacific. I'm going to switch over to the next slide for you so you can see this map. So here's Japan right here, and they want a free hand in gaining all of this down here. And so they're going to have the attack on Pearl Harbor. They're going to also attack the Philippines and push all the way down to Port Moresby right here. They almost get into Australia before they get stopped. And, they look at us as a threat because after they invade Manchuria, we will cut off their access to their American assets. We're going to freeze all their assets. We're going to block them from gaining access to oil and to iron. And so it's going to have an impact on their economy, and they're going to have people that are going to lose jobs. And so Yamamoto is going to plan this attack on Pearl Harbor. But he will tell the emperor and Tojo from the very beginning that Japan has about 2 years that they can freely run amok in the Pacific, but if they don't defeat the Americans within 2 years, that they will lose the war. Well, they don't even get 2 years. They get about 6 months. The first big thing that's going to happen in America's favor is going to be the Battle of Midway. Now, Midway Island is right here in the middle. And the Japanese have decided that they need to knock out our base there. And so we find out about it. A guy named Roquefort will break the Japanese code, the JN-25 code, and we'll find out that they're planning an attack on the islands of Midway. And so we're going to sneak out 3 aircraft carriers, and they never realize that we have 3 out there. They think there's only 1. Oh, well, I take that back. They may have thought there were 2, but they're going to attack the same one twice, which is the USS Yorktown. And so we're going to catch them off guard, and we're going to be able to sink 4 of their frontline aircraft carriers at the Battle of Midway. And so that's why Midway is so important. It's a turning point in the Pacific part of the war, because from that point on, the Japanese will never be on the offensive again. They'll always be on the defensive and always on the run. Now, we're going to use something called the island hopping strategy, where we're going to go from this spot to this spot to this spot, and we're just going to kind of skip, hop, and jump across the Pacific, establishing air bases to be able to take off for the next one. So our first one's going to be right here at Guadalcanal, and then we're going to hop over here to Tarawa, and then to Saipan, and to Iwo Jima, and so that's the island hopping strategy. Now, one of the places that the Japanese are going to be able to gain control of right after Pearl Harbor are the Philippines. And they are going to attack the Philippines, and they're going to capture a bunch of Americans. Unfortunately, they're not, for them, fortunately for us, they are not going to be able to grab MacArthur. MacArthur had been the military head of the forces on the Philippines, and they're going to be able to spirit him off the island and get him down to Australia. But the ones they're going to catch are going to be put through what becomes known as the Bataan Death March. And they're going to march these guys 80 miles nonstop to a prisoner of war camp. And if they stop, if they stumble, if they, for any reason, slow down, they could be beat to death by the Japanese guards that are marching them towards Bataan. Now, these guys right here, these are 2 guys that survive the prisoner of war camp. And so 4 years later, when they're liberated, they are nothing but skin and bones, literally, because the Japanese are going to basically almost starve them to death. And so that is the Bataan Death March. Now, you're going to have about, there's kind of questionable in the numbers, so that's why you have 1 to 600 Americans that will die. But upwards of 10,000 Filipino soldiers will die on this death march and within the prisoner of war camp. Now, it's going to take America a while to be able to get our footing. And so from 1941 until 1944, we're going to be trying to open a second front. But this is a logistical nightmare. It takes a lot of planning and a lot of gaining of supplies and stuff. So it's not until June 6th of 1944 that we are able to open a second front. Now, this is something that Stalin has been hammering us about ever since we first got into the war. But like I said, it takes a while to get this together. So this map right here is a diagram of the landing at Omaha, Sword, Juneau, and Utah beaches that will become the second front. Now, Omaha is the one you mostly hear about because that's the one where the highest death toll is. Most of the other beach landings will go off without a hitch. But if you have seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, then the first 30 minutes of that movie is about the landings at Omaha Beach. And so this is going to open up the second front. This is the beginning of the end for the Germans. And we're going to be able to push back and push back and push back. Now, this is where Yamamoto is saying that, he had seen the Americans, and he had been over here for a while and knew that the industrial might of the United States was incredible. And this is when it's going to come to fruition. We can fight a two-front war very well because our country has got all the natural resources to be able to create anything that we need for a war effort. And so we're going to be able to pump out war supplies like no other country on earth at the time. So by May of 1945, Germany is going to surrender, and that's known as VE Day, Victory over Europe. And then in August of the same year, Japan is going to surrender, and that is VJ Day, Victory over Japan. Now that is just the basic timeline of the high points of the war. Most history teachers get into teaching history because we love teaching World War II. If we had our druthers, we could spend an entire semester teaching World War II. But seeing as this is a survey course and not a military history course, that's why I'm kind of shrinking it down to the most important pieces of this war. Now, in America, we have got to be able to fund the war. It doesn't come cheap. And yes, war is good for the economy because it creates jobs. That is why it's going to end the Great Depression, because it's going to take us from a very high unemployment rate to a zero unemployment rate almost overnight. So you're going to have the government try and fund the war the same way they tried, they worked at funding World War I. They're going to use higher taxes. They're going to borrow from banks and investors. They're going to sell Liberty bonds or war bonds like these right here. The common goodbye on the phone during World War II is bye-bye and buy bonds, reminding everybody to buy Liberty bonds. And if you recall, a Liberty bond works very much like a savings bond does now. You go and you go to the bank and you request a savings bond or a war bond. Say you want a $25 bond, and they're going to say, thank you very much. This will cost you $12.50. So you're going to pay half of its value, and you're going to hang on to it for 7 years and wait for it to mature. And after 7 years, you can go back to the bank and cash in that bond and get $25 for it. So for 7 years, the country has been able to borrow your money, and they're going to pay you double when when it matures. So that's how bonds work. They're also going to encourage Americans to plant victory gardens. Save the commercially grown food as much as we can for funding for feeding the military. And so, garden vegetables and things that you can grow yourself, they're going to encourage Americans to do that. You're going to have large number of men that are going to enlist. There is no lack of patriotism during this time. After Pearl Harbor, it's much like after 9/11, everybody is hacked off. And so the men are going to line up in lines down the street to sign up to become military. And so the jobs that they're going to leave behind, then you're going to have the women step in to do, and older Americans. And so that's why the jobless rate goes down to zero. You're going to also have a big propaganda push during this time. Not only are you going to have posters coming out that are going to encourage people to enlist or people to grow victory gardens, buy Liberty bonds, you're also going to have ones like this that are going to warn people to watch out what you say and who you say it around. There were more German spies during World War II than there were during World War I. You're even going to have German submarines that are going to get within striking distance of some of our harbors over on the East Coast. And so there's this huge campaign to gain support for the war and to watch out for foreign spies. One of the most common ones was loose lips sink ships. But also on the downside, you're going to have, especially the Japanese Americans, be looked at with a lot of suspicion. Now, this is directly as a result of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. There will be some suspicion against Germans and Italian Americans, but not like it was against the Japanese Americans. And so a lot of Japanese Americans are going to be moved away from these coastal cities where they lived and put into internment camps on the interior of the country. Now, these are not Japanese nationals. These are Japanese Americans. They are American citizens. And they're going to lose everything. They're going to lose their homes. They're going to lose their businesses. And they're going to be placed in these internment camps. Now, these internment camps are, while they look similar to concentration camps, are not worked the same way. These citizens are not going to be mass slaughtered. Their families are going to be kept together. They're going to be housed and fed. They're not going to be starved to death, but their rights as American citizens are going to be totally trampled upon. It's going to be upheld by a Supreme Court case called Korematsu v. U.S. that's going to justify their being moved, but it's still going to be an absolute derogation of the 14th Amendment for these Americans' rights. You're also going to have women in the war that are going to step up and take on all kinds of new roles that women had never had a chance to take. And this is where this sign becomes very popular. This is Rosie the Riveter. Rosie the Riveter is not a real person, just like Uncle Sam is not a real guy. It's a symbol of American women during this time period that we can do this. We can step up and we can be take the jobs of men and keep the country moving. So they're going to not only be secretaries and office clerks, they're going to step up and they're going to join the military as pilots and as ambulance drivers and as coastal watchers. And so you're going to have women in the Army, that's going to be called WACs, Women's Auxiliary Corps. You're going to have women in the Air Force, WAFs, and you're going to have women in the Navy, WAVs. Some of these women, like Teddy Tompkins, are going to learn how to fly planes, and they're going to ferry planes across the country and keep supplies moving across the country so the men can go out and fight and fly the fighter planes and the bombers. They're going to train pilots. One of the bases locally, or at least close to Texas, is going to be up in Oklahoma. And so they're going to be instrumental in making sure the country keeps moving forward, and they're going to take on non-traditional jobs in very dangerous situations during this time period. Now, there are some significant people that you need to know about during this time period that are instrumental in not only leading us during war, but in the actual fighting of the war. So, first off, we have Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. He believed that we should help Britain and France defeat Hitler. He saw this coming for quite some time and knew that the fascist governments of Europe were going to be a problem in their threat towards democracy. And so he's going to meet secretly with this guy right here, that's Winston Churchill, at the Atlantic Charter, and that's where they come up with the Europe First strategy. He is the only president that we've ever had that served more than 2 terms. Now, keep in mind, serving 2 terms was only a tradition. We did not have the amendment that limits president to a total of 10 years. And so by the time we get to the end of his 2nd term, we're on the doorstep of war. And so he's going to get reelected because nobody wants to change horses in the middle of the stream. And when we get to 1944, we're up to our eyeballs in war. So once again, nobody wants to change the leader. And so that's how he's going to get elected 4 times. Now, right after his 4th election, in April of 1945, he has just been sworn in for his 4th term. He is going to suffer a brain aneurysm and he's going to die. And so in April of 1945, Harry Truman is going to become president. Now he is going. FDR is going to be part of what's known as the Big Three. That's FDR, Churchill, and Stalin. And he's going to be part of several of these conferences that they're going to have. And one of the important ones is going to be Yalta. Yalta is where they're going to discuss what's going to happen to Germany once they defeat them. And at this meeting, FDR trying to get Stalin to cooperate and help us against Japan once we have gotten Germany out of the way, is going to allow the Soviets to be the ones to capture the flag. They're going to be the ones that are going to be able to take over Berlin. And so FDR is going to get a lot of criticism for this. They're going to believe that he sold out to the Soviets. And so that's one of those big conferences. And this is one that's going to come back and we're going to revisit once we get into the Cold War. Now, Winston Churchill is only going to be Prime Minister of England or Great Britain during the war years. He had been on the political scene over there for quite some time, and there was kind of a love-hate relationship with the British and Winnie. But don't criticize him to the British. They love Winston Churchill as far as what he did for that particular time period. He is going to be the backbone and the symbol of courage during World War II. Stalin, and I've already shown you his picture earlier, after the USSR gets attacked by Great Britain, is going to come screaming and crying to the Allies of help me, help me, help me. I don't exactly have a lot of sympathy for this man. He's the one that chose to get in bed with the devil and sign the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. I don't know what he was thinking. And so he is going to be a thorn in the Allied side until we get to June of 1944, just constantly harping for this second front. And in return, when we get ready to, we've gotten Germany to surrender and we're now focusing on Japan, he is going to drag his feet in coming to our aid. So he's not really going to keep that promise that he made to FDR about helping us if they get to be the ones to capture Berlin. Now, Harry Truman, this guy right here, is going to take over on the death of FDR. He is one of my favorite presidents. I can really respect a leader who will take responsibility for the actions of his administration, good, bad, or indifferent. And that was Harry Truman. He even had a sign on his desk that said, "The buck stops here." So whether it was good or whether it was bad, he took personal responsibility for what went on while he was president. And I don't care if I agree with the leader or don't agree with the leader as far as their political stand. I can respect someone who will be responsible for what goes on. So that is Harry Truman. Harry Truman is going to be the one that is going to make the decision to drop the atomic bomb, because we don't even know that it works until July of 1945. And he won't ever back off from that. He's going to look at the casualty numbers from previous invasions of Okinawa and Iwo Jima, and he understood that the Japanese don't surrender. And so he makes the decision that once he knows that the bomb is going to be successful, and he won't ever back off from that. Now, some of your military leaders that you're going to need to know, this guy right here, this is Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower, born in Denison, Texas. Didn't grow up there, but that's where he was born. He is going to be the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, so all forces in Europe, British, the Free French, Canadian, all the different forces that are fighting on the Allied side, he is over them in Europe, much to the dismay and upset of Monty, General Bernard Montgomery, who was the head of the British forces. So he's even over him. And so it's his job to make sure that all the plans are laid in place. He was the one that finally said, okay, these are the days we're going to go for D-Day. And so he had the weight of the entire European war on his shoulders. This guy right here is Omar Bradley. He is Eisenhower's boots on the ground. He is, he's going to be on the ground at D-Day, and through, he was even on the ground at the North Africa landings, Sicily. He had enough control of the situation to be able to keep George Patton in line. And I'll talk about him more in a second. So that's Omar Bradley. And then a few others. This is Douglas MacArthur. He's going to be the Army Supreme Allied Commander in the Pacific. This right here is Admiral Nimitz. He's going to be over the Navy in the Pacific. So these two guys have to share. Much to the upset of this guy. If you recall what I've already told you about Douglas MacArthur, he was very gung-ho. He had graduated from West Point like his father. He intended to get a Medal of Honor like his father, and nobody usually told him no. And so it's because of him that we're going to stop at the Philippines and retake the Philippines, even though we probably could have bypassed them with and come back and free the Philippines later with a lot less loss of life. But FDR said, okay, we'll let you go back and take back the Philippines. If you're ever down in Fredericksburg, Texas, that's where this man grew up. There's the Nimitz Museum down there. There's also the War of the Pacific Museum down there. Both of them very interesting to go through. He was the one that laid the go-ahead for the Midway surprise attack. It was his idea for the island hopping strategy. Here is George Patton. George Patton was come from a long time military family. His dream was to die gloriously in battle. If you've seen the movie Forrest Gump, that is where they get that idea for Lieutenant Dan, when he was so upset that Forrest had saved him. You know, he was supposed to die in battle. Unfortunately for Patton, he's going to die in a car wreck. He's not going to die gloriously in battle. But he is instrumental in getting us across North Africa. He was a tank commander, and he had read the German General Rommel's book on tank tactics. And so he knew how to outmaneuver him. And so he is, even though he is a loose cannon, and he almost gets court-martialed for slapping a private who was suffering from shell shock. His men loved him, and so he is going to be instrumental in winning certain strategic battles that are going to move America and the Allies forward. And then this guy right here is George Marshall. He is FDR's chief of staff, so he's going to keep FDR up on what's all going on and how to go from here to here to here, so that FDR is well informed about what's going on not only the European theater, but also the Pacific theater of the war. You also are going to have very significant groups that are going to play an instrumental part in fighting this war. This group right here are the planes of a group called the Flying Tigers. These were American pilots who are going to go to war before America gets into it. They're going to fly for the British, and they're going to fly cargo missions and offer fighter protection for cargo missions from India into Burma, helping to supply British troops fighting with the Chinese against the Japanese in that area. Yes, I know their planes look like sharks, but they're called the Flying Tigers. You also have got the Tuskegee Airmen. That's these guys right here. These are African-American pilots who are going to fly fighter planes, starting off in Italy. This is what the movie Red Tails is about. And if you've seen Red Tails, you know that when these guys first show up over in Italy, the white bomber pilots are not real happy about this. I mean, this is the 1940s. This is some of the most intense times of segregation and racism. But the first time these guys save their butts, they're going to not ever want to fly without them again. African Americans and Hispanics and Native Americans are all going to fight with distinction in this war as well as any other war they have fought in. African Americans have fought in every single war we've ever fought in, from the French and Indian War to any current conflict we have going on now. And so there is never any reason to think that just because you're a minority group that you don't have honor and valor in war. These guys up here, these are the Navajo Code Talkers. And Native Americans of all tribes fought in this war. But the Navajo have a uniqueness because their language cannot be learned from a book. It can only be learned by a Navajo teaching you how to speak that language. And so that made it very, very good for sending coded messages. But don't waste your time watching the movie Wind Talkers. That's a Nicolas Cage movie, supposedly about this group. No, it's like every other Nicolas Cage movie. It's about his personal problems. They have one scene in that movie that really talks about the actions of the Navajo code talkers during this time period. Other aspects of this war, you have got the Holocaust. Now, this is where most of us first gain interest in World War II when we're kids, is because of the injustice that the Nazis are going to inflict on the Jewish people of Europe, or wherever they could lay their hands on them. I'm not really exactly sure where this hatred comes from. Maybe it's because the Jews have always been known as God's chosen people. Maybe because the Pharisees and the Sadducees were the ones that were behind the crucifixion of Jesus. Or maybe it's because every time these people come out of bondage, and you can look at this group all the way back to Moses' time of being enslaved and freed, and every time they come out of being enslaved, it doesn't take them very long at all to become very well off and pick themselves up and start all over again. And so this anti-Semitism is going to turn into genocide, and it is going to be the mass slaughter of 6.5 million Jews across Europe. This picture right here is the entrance into Auschwitz, one of the most notorious of the death camps. This map here shows you where not only the death camps were, but the concentration camps. So some of these camps are not set up as slaughter camps like Auschwitz was. Some of them are going to be concentration camps because they're going to go after also Slavs and political opponents, and gypsies are going to be part of this group. Anybody who tried to hide the Jews are going to be part of this group. And so they're going to use a system of killing them straight off in gas chambers and in ovens, or they're going to starve them to death or work them to death. This picture right here, I believe somewhere in this picture is Elie Wiesel, who wrote the book Night. Bergen-Belsen is where Anne Frank is going to die. And so this is going to be known as the final solution. It's based off the 1C protocol, and it was how they were going to go about killing the Jews. If Hitler had taken the money that he spent on trying to slaughter these people and put it into the war effort instead, they might just have won the war. But he was so focused on getting rid of all these people, they're going to continue to kill them up until the very last minute as different camps are being liberated by the Allies as they go across Europe and they find these places. Now, the last aspect that I want to go over for World War II is the atomic bomb project. The atomic bomb creation was under the title of the Manhattan Project, and it's going to be split up under several different physicists as well as several different places across the United States. The idea for this will come from Albert Einstein, who was a German Jew who, when Hitler was getting rid of all the intelligentsia, will run them out. He's going to escape at that point and come to America. But he had been a leading physicist in Germany, and so he's going to write a letter to FDR telling him about what the Germans were working on. And so this is how we get the beginnings of the Manhattan Project. A guy named Enrico Fermi is going to create the first chain reaction at the University of Chicago. And then Robert Oppenheimer, also nicknamed Oppie, he is going to be over the labs in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where they're actually going to be developing the weapon itself. There's yet another place you need to know, and that's going to be Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where they have the heavy water plant, which is separating uranium-235 from its from just plain uranium, because that is the active isotope that causes the bomb to explode. They're going to test this for the first time at Trinity, the Trinity test site in New Mexico. And when it works, they're going to get a message to Truman, who was at that time in a meeting in Potsdam, Germany, so we've defeated the Germans, and they are finalizing what's going to happen to Germany at this conference in Potsdam. And you have Stalin, who is dragging his feet about things and being rather obstinate. And when Truman finds out that the bomb works, he's going to shun Stalin and not say anything more to him. And so the first bomb is going to be dropped on Hiroshima on August 6th, 1945, and that's known as Little Boy. And that's this particular bomb right here. And then this is the plane that carried it. It's called the Enola Gay. The captain is Paul Tibbets. It was named after his mother. His mother's name was Enola Gay. And we're expecting the Japanese to immediately surrender. I mean, this is the devastation that it's going to cause. This is Hiroshima before, and here's Hiroshima after. But they don't. They're trying to negotiate a separate peace with Russia. And so 3 days later, we're going to drop Fat Man on Nagasaki. And that is going to bring the Japanese to the table and say, yep, we surrender. Now, you have to understand with the Japanese that they have been taught from their very earliest memories that surrender was not part of their makeup, that they were supposed to die for the emperor. And that's why they were so reluctant about surrendering. And so August 14th of 1945 is known as VJ Day. Now, this is going to place America as the front and center country for the superpowers. We're the only country left standing that had not had major internal damage due to the war. And so we are going to take that role, and we're never going to be isolationists again. We're going to be all up in everybody's business, sometimes to our own detriment. But that is the characteristic that we've learned from the past, and we're going to keep that, for the most part, to the present day. Now, in your notes, you're going to see where I have got a couple of writing prompts. One of them is, in what ways did the U.S. adopt an isolationist foreign policy in the 1920s and 30s? Some of those policies are going to include not ratifying the Treaty of Versailles, not joining the League of Nations, being a part of the Kellogg-Briand Pact, being a part of the Five Powers Treaty, the Stimson Doctrine, the Neutrality Acts. So you want to make yourself a list of some of those policies and be able to explain, so define them on the other side, so that this should show up in a writing prompt. Then you not only can identify it, but you can also describe it and be able to tie it in on that one. And then on the back side, you have got to what extent did World War II change the U.S. economic system and society? And so look at how it changes the economy. Look how it changes the role of women. Look at how it changes the role of minority groups, and be able to define and connect that back. And so this ends what we're doing for World War II. Next class, we'll pick up with the Cold War. And until then, y'all have a great one. Thanks. Bye.